Hello and welcome to Columbus Metropolitan Club. This is our second forum this week. It is great to see all of you here. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo, the chair of CMC's Board of Trustees. CMC, of course, welcomes everyone. Today's CMC Forum, Conversation 2019, it's our annual event, is sponsored by the Jefferies Company, AT&T, and Planned Parenthood Advocates of Central Ohio. Each are represented by many friends and associates in the audience today. Won't you please help me thank them? Shared values and aspirations passed from generation to generation provide the foundation of the ideal family business. There are many examples, families of teachers, firefighters, doctors, lawyers, and politicians. Today, we are honored to hear from one of Ohio's families who invest their time, intellect, passion, and resources in the pursuit of a better life for all of us. Please help me welcome a man who has served at the state and federal level since 1974, U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown. And serving our community from City Hall since 2015, Columbus City Councilwoman Elizabeth Brown. And of course, our forum host and host of WBNS TV 10's Face the State, and Emmy award-winning journalist, Scott Light. Scott, thank you.
Hi, you two. Let's talk. I want to start chronologically here because I had a terrific coffee with Liz the other day, and she was giving me a lot of family anecdotes about where public service and this commitment to building up your neighborhoods and making them better. She was telling me that, I don't know if it started, but certainly two integral parts to this whole thing were both of your grandmothers. Emily, of course, your mother, and your other grandmother, Carolyn. Let's start there, Senator. Tell us about your mom and where her passions were when it came to public service, improving life for the good of the whole, and how did she instill that in you?
Thanks. I love talking about my mother, as I know Liz loves talking about her grandmother. My mom, Emily, our first daughter is named after my mother, Emily Brown, who is here. Emily, just I can introduce you. So, Emily has pursued public service, but we can talk about that at some point. My mother, Emily Campbell, was born in Mansfield, Georgia, and my father was born in Mansfield, Ohio. And they met at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington when my mother had gone to serve the war effort in the 1940s and the 40s. And my dad was back from overseas service in the Army, and they met at a soldier's dance in at the Mayflower, and their first date was at the Willard Hotel in Washington, and they fell in love. My dad was drafted in the Army, was on the older age of people that served, and my mom had been a teacher for a couple of years, and they met in Washington, came to Mansfield, and my mom was. She comes from a sort of a typical white Southern small town family. Mansfield, Georgia was 500 people, but my mom always cared about civil rights, and she was president of the Ohio YWCA, which next to Planned Parenthood is one of the best advocates for women's rights and for civil rights of any organization out there. She got to pick up Shirley Chisholm at the airport once and spend an hour with her, and the first African-American woman to ever run for president. And she would come back with these stories to us, but she always principally cared about civil rights and got my brothers, I'm the youngest of three boys, got us engaged. And she, her last good day on earth was the swearing in, the inauguration of Barack Obama. She had supported Obama before anybody else in the family in the primaries. and she was in hospice for the last 5-6 weeks of her life, and had an okay death, and we got to be with her every single day, except she told Connie and me to go to the inauguration. My brothers were there at the house, and it was her last really alert day, January 20th, 2009, and it was a celebration in so many ways of what her life was.
What was her reaction on your first elective win?
She played such a role. My dad really wondered why I was doing it. My dad was a family physician, and he really emphasized. I give most of my social justice views, ascribe them to my mother, but my dad really did care about. My dad actually was one of maybe 12 people in America that voted for Barry Goldwater in 1964 and George McGovern in 1972. And the 72 vote had a whole lot to do with influence of his sons. But my dad always took care of people regardless of ability to pay. He found ways to take care of low-income patients, and so he taught me that. But both of them were those kinds of grandparents. My dad didn't say much. My mom obviously said much more, had that influence.
Councilmember Brown, let's talk about Carolyn, who, by the way, the senator mentioned the family connection with the names. Carolyn is also the name of your daughter.
Of my daughter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell us about your grandmother.
Yeah. So I think about both my grandmothers a lot in terms of why I wanted to run for office or why I had an interest in public policy. And I've always thought of them that way. I think about them even more recently because I think they would be deeply troubled by a lot of what's happening in our country. Carolyn in particular, she had a real love for her community. She raised her 4 girls with my grandfather Clark outside Dayton, and she cared deeply about Dayton and always found ways to be working and bolstering her own community. And she also loved to, she had a lot of foreign-born students that would come and stay in their house. She loved the world. She was a Spanish teacher, and they would put all their girls into a station wagon and drive to Mexico for vacation from Dayton, Ohio. She really sort of believed in the idea of a global community, and really believed in progressive ideals too. But she taught my sister Emily and me, along with our grandmother Emily, both of them, I think, taught us a lot about why my sister Emily is a public interest lawyer and represents immigrant families. And I really think both of our grandmothers have a lot to do with that, in addition to our dad. But in so many ways, it's their influence as women in our lives.
By the way, Senator, Liz tells me the smartest person in the family is Emily. So no offense, but
Sorry, Dad.
That's okay.
Emily's got the biggest brain of everybody.
She does.
Let's fast forward a little bit.
I would say, can I say one?
Sure.
Emily, while in law school, gave birth to 2 children while in law school, and Emily is, and she had one of the hardest law schools in the country, and she really is smart. But so is Elizabeth.
Hey, I said it first. I have no problem with that.
Let me rescue you from that comment. And let's talk about when you and Emily were toddlers. You told me that this gentleman here to your right was omnipresent. That no matter what campaign he was running, he was at school events. He was everywhere. But you also said you kind of grew up on his speeches and pancake breakfast in the morning and spaghetti dinners at night. Talk about that life a little bit with your dad in public office.
Yeah, well, one thing I liked, I don't know if you remember this, Dad, but I think it was my 4th grade teacher, it might have been my 3rd grade teacher. So Emily's and my parents divorced when I was 3. And then my dad lived in Lorain County, and my mom lived in Licking County, and we went to school in Licking County and went back and forth between households. And I forget if it was my 3rd grade or 4th grade teacher, but she was shocked about halfway through the year when she realized that my dad didn't live in Granville with us, because he was at everything. Every school play, every activity, Emily's basketball games. Everyone's very fortunate. I did not play basketball, but Emily was pretty good. And so it was pretty remarkable to be representing a northeastern Ohio district and having to work in DC and also being that present, we feel really lucky for that. But we also, when we were in Lorraine with Dad, we went to lots of events, and fortunately I had my sister to help occupy my time, and we would tug at Dad's tailcoats and say, or coattails, excuse me, and say, let's go, we're done with this one, and then we'd move on to the next one.
Well, Liz, one time, we were in Springfield doing a parade, and Liz was carrying candy and handing it out, and she kind of got mugged. I mean, some guy like
Candy mugged.
What's that?
Candy mugged. Like I didn't have money on me.
I mean, they kind of like pushed her to steal the candy, so we decided to scale back the parades a little bit. But one story, Liz, I've run for office for a lot of years, and the only election I lost in 1990, Liz was, they could see this was a tough race. I mean, they could see it was busy. I don't know what they could exactly see, and Liz would have been 6, not to say almost 7. And we were getting out of the car one day in Columbus, and she said, Dad, now you're Secretary of State, right? And I said, yeah. She said, now your job is to count the votes, right? And I said, yeah. She said, so what's the problem with this race? And she figured out that, but then on election night when I lost, I remember putting them to bed. We were staying at probably Sheraton downtown, and if you do this enough, you got to do. Daryl knows this. You got to do well enough, and I was not doing well enough in Portage County or something. I could just get a feel. Herb Asher knows this early in the night that it wasn't going well, and so I put them to bed at maybe 10 or 11 o'clock, and there were still 35% of the votes out. And I told the girls heard that, and the next morning when Emily woke up, the first thing she said is, Dad, did they count the other 35% yet? Because she was anyway, but things like that. So,
yeah.
What was it like, speaking of campaigns, let's just pick up there, when you saw the first negative ad about your dad?
Yeah.
What in the, you mentioned one to me that had a signature sign-off, so to speak.
Sayonara Sherrod.
When was that?
I would have been 6. It was the 1990 race, and I remember it was kind of a cartoony ad, so I thought it was just weird and silly. And I didn't know what Sayonara Sherrod meant, that they were saying like goodbye to your job or whatever. I mean, you could explain the politics of it. But no, the one that was, I actually really remember more. I was at my friend Mallory Donaldson's house. I know people here know Mallory, but I don't know if she's here. She lived in Elyria then, but she's works at Columbus 2020 now. Anyway, I was at Mallory's house, and I saw the commercial that, was it 92 or 94? They had that girl of about 10 years old talking about how you took her parents' Social Security or something like that. But it was a girl about my age talking straight to camera about how my dad had ruined her family's life. And I felt like, you have no idea what you're talking about, lady. It didn't faze me in the sense that I thought she was speaking any truth. And it turns out there was an interesting backstory to that commercial. But that one was a little bit harder, I think.
Sure.
Emily and I both had to develop some thick skin because every 2 years somebody was trying to take his job, right? I mean, we knew that's what campaigns were. But that one was kind of disturbing to see. Since it was almost a peer of mine, I guess.
After the Sayonara Sherrod series of ads, saying it doesn't matter the background, I'd taken a trip to Japan, which I hadn't, but it was it was the tagline of my opponent's ads. And the 3 days after the election, I was taking Emily and Liz to go roller skating. And Emily had her best friend with her, and Elizabeth. Was that Elizabeth? I think her name was Elizabeth. And we're going out to the car, and Emily and I think you were along, I'm not sure. Emily and Liz and I went one way, and Elizabeth and her mom went the other way, and Elizabeth turns around, and this is 3 days after the election, and said, Sayonara, Sherrod. And it's like, do something with that kid. Anyway.
She is never permitted to come to the house, ever again. Were there times, though, where you had to sit with both girls and kind of explain, this is kind of what Dad does, and these people say some nutty things about me, and this is the way it is?
I don't remember those conversations, but there are,
Yeah, I mean, I think we picked it up. I mean, time that you really explained your job to me that has stuck with me, which some people in this room may have heard me tell this story because I do kind of tell it a lot, was in 1990 something when we were leaving church and a man flagged us, the three of us were leaving church and a man flagged us down to say thank you. He's a congressman, we all stopped and you turned around and he said thank you with this really earnest expression that at 9 or 10 years old, however old I was, I could tell there was something very real behind his gratitude. So when we got into the car, I asked you what it was, and you told me that you took a vote that not many people took, and it meant a great deal to this person. And then you tried to explain to us what the Defense of Marriage Act was, because it was DOMA. My dad voted against DOMA when only a few dozen people in the House had the courage to do that in the mid-90s. And that was the first time that I really understood kind of what your job was besides meeting people, helping them solve a problem, X, Y, Z, but you really talking about how you can stand on the side of principles and people, or you can do something else.
Well, the one of you, and I don't know if it was you or Emily said this after a conversation like that, been said, I'm going to vote this way, and I know it's going to make the election next year harder. And one of you said, well, why don't you just vote that way and not tell anybody? And so, I tried that, but that just, because of people like Roland and you, I couldn't get away with it.
Yeah.
Democracy,
Right. So
even in Trump's America, democracy.
we'll get to that in just a little bit. So when you're traveling around running for various offices, you've got your girls in tow, so to speak. Afterwards, was this commitment to public service, was it an implicit or explicit part of your parenting? How did you talk about it and relay it to your daughters?
Well, I talked about public service. I talked about, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I was very conscious about not making it their whole lives. I mean, it was what I did for a living. It meant sometimes when they were on spring break, I used to come back to Ohio every week, but when they were in spring break, they'd come to Washington for a week. We did, but when, I did, it wasn't like every time we were together we went to a parade. Sure. It wasn't anything like that. So I always was conscious of this is my job, but this is not my entire life. And that's sometimes hard to do, in part because, as Liz has found out quickly, because she's so good at doing what Abraham Lincoln used to say, I got to go out and get my public opinion bath. And Liz is really good at that. And Liz came to the conclusion, I remember when Connie and I first started dating, she realized this quickly, that when you're in church or at the grocery store or walking down the street, you're public property. If you decide to do this for a living, then that's what Emmanuel's learning. I just saw a minute ago, it means it's what you do. And you expect to be public that way. And that's an important component of that. But you also have to carve time when nobody's around in your home working in the garden, or do we do every year? The highlight of the year for me, and maybe for them, I'm never quite sure, was we used to take a train trip every year. We'd go on Amtrak and go out west, and we'd go to a national park and a baseball stadium every year, and we went to Montana once and stopped in Minneapolis, went to Denver, went to the Grand Canyon, went to the West Coast, whatever. And those were the best. Those 10 days were partly just riding on the train and getting a sleeper car were the best days of my life in many ways. They were young teen, well, from small children into the young teens, and then they quit wanting to go with me on train trips. But now they've talked about grandkids, train trips, Patrick, right? So.
But I mean, you talked about issues, I think. I mean, really, of course, we saw what he did for a living, but I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. My husband Patrick's here. Our kids, Carolyn and Russell. I mean, I'm learning as a parent that so much of what you did, I think, is what most parents in this room do, which is you teach your kid through talking about values and principles and ideals, and we saw you act on those in your public life. But there was, I think, nothing remarkably different from what parents all over the country do every day to try to raise good people who give back to their communities.
And you teach them about your faith. I brought this book along. This is I was on an airplane soon after my divorce, and a woman said to me, you should record things, just write about things your children and you do. So I went out and bought this nicely bound book, and I started writing in it in April of 1987. So Elizabeth was 3 and Emily was 6. And I wrote about things they did, and they were really, really cute, but as they got older, they were really, really less cute, so I quit writing as much. But for instance, one story in here, I was reading a Bible story to Liz, and she couldn't have been more than 3 then. I'm sitting on the bed, and she says, Dad, stop for a second. What's the name of that guy, Mary's guy that was born in the nest? And Emily said, that was Jesus, Elizabeth, like that. So stories like that. Some are only, I know we all think, as Ann said, we all think our own kids are funnier than other kids. But sometimes they are,
I'm checking the clock here because I just want to make sure that we get in everything before we toss it to some audience questions. Can I ask you a question about kind of what put you on your path to public service? We were talking, you were working in New York after you graduated near the top of your class at Columbia, New York Magazine, right?
Were you near the top of your class?
I mean, that's probably
No, I'm sorry.
But you at that point, you're working in New York, and you feel, I don't know, you tell me, was it a sense of obligation or just feeling like I need to get back to Ohio, I need to pursue some other things? What was it?
Well, I think I took a year between high school and college to do an AmeriCorps program called City Year. Is anyone familiar with City Year? I know AT&T is familiar with City. I'm looking at Chris. And City Year, for those of you who don't know, is an AmeriCorps program. You work in schools, and at the time that I was an AmeriCorps member, I was in a school outside in Philly because my sister was going to college outside Philly, and I wanted to, if I was going to take a gap year, I wanted to do it near Emily. It was basically an assistant teacher role, doing public service projects sort of infused in there was my charge. And I just learned so much in that year. It was formative for me. I learned so much about the manifestation of public policies and really how they intersect with people's lives. That stuck with me. It's not just about textbooks and teacher ratios, which are very important, but it's also housing policy, because I was the one who took kids out of the class to walk them around if they were having a behavior issue, and hearing about what went on the night before that was contributing to that, right? And at 18, I just was able to see it in a new way that when I was a kid behind the desk just the year earlier, you don't see. When you step outside the desk and are on the teacher's side, you see things differently. So that instilled in me this idea that I was interested in public policy, and I think it took a while of working in New York to realize if I was going to work in politics and government to try to impact public policy, I wanted to do it in my home state. I care deeply about Ohio and the opportunity that we provide city by city, neighborhood by neighborhood to people. So that's why I moved back here. And I ran for office. It's one thing to decide I wanted to try to impact public policy, but I really ran for office because of my dad, because I don't know that I otherwise would have had the faith, maybe I would have, but I don't know for sure that I would have had the faith that I can do this work and I can make an impact without having to compromise principle. There's almost a myth out there that politicians don't have people's backs, and I lived with proof that they can. I grew up seeing that, and you don't have to move to the squishy middle, if you will, in order to get things done. You can accomplish things and also stick to your principles, and that was really important for me to know was possible if I was going to do this. So it really is because of my dad that I had the confidence.
And without making an endorsement of somebody running for re-election, she has done that.
Thank you.
Do you remember? Go ahead.
But thank you. But when I I ran for office for the first time in 2015, a lot of people asked me, I'm sure you're talking to your dad every day, getting all sorts of advice. What's his advice? And I was 7 months pregnant at the time. So I said, my dad's advice only goes so far. Because he never had to do this he never had to campaign 7 months pregnant. It's a whole other ballgame.
Well, and she really did, and we didn't really have an arrangement exactly, but she didn't ask for a lot of advice, and I didn't push myself in any way on her. I helped her a little, but I didn't help her that much. I mean, she knew so much because she had been part of this, but she really did this race on her own, which made me a lot even prouder of her, and showed the voters that she stands by herself and stands with. I mean, none of us stands by herself, but she really did it.
We'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of the fullness in your heart when you hear from your daughter, I'm running for city council. What was that like?
That was pretty cool. I mean, at first it was I could sort of see that moving in that direction. But the best part was when she moved back to Columbus, and I saw then that she wanted to do public service here and get involved in those kinds of activities here. That was the one that I was most excited about, because she was coming back to the state. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know she was going to run for consul, but I figured she was moving in the direction of running for office.
Let me ask about that in this way, because we have a couple of different generations represented here. So, Senator, when you look at the toxicity of politics right now, do you worry that there will be fewer good people on all sides who are going to run for office?
Sure, I worry about that. I think everybody in this room does. I think what I've also thought about is, this is not empty flattery. Elizabeth is a whole lot better public speaker and a whole lot better at this job than I was when I was her age. I mean, I don't say that as empty flattery. It really is true. I watch how talented she is and how committed she is. I also, though, recognize that when I first ran for office, Democrats did better in this state than they do now, and this state is more challenging for somebody with her and my views today, probably challenging to be successful, more of a challenge to be successful than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So she's, as I said, I think she's better than I am at it, but I also think that she's got to win in an environment where Republicans win time after time after time after time in this state.
Do you worry about your peers when you talk to people and say, you know what, you ought to, bring that idea to a city council meeting, or, jump in this race? Do you worry about this younger generation being turned off by politics?
I actually don't worry about people being turned off by politics. I mean, it is hard to see what's going on, and I really felt more nervous and more scared after the send her back chants at the Trump rally 2 nights ago. I mean, I don't care what your political opinions are. That was shocking. So I don't mean to diminish how appalling some of the news cycle can be on a daily basis, but I see regular people, everyday people, really engaged in the process. And I'll give you one example, but truly, I see it all the time. And I don't just mean the Parkland students who were very inspiring, but still far away, right there in Florida. I mean right here. Right after the 2016 elections, there was an excitement of kind of women running for office. And my stepsister Laura tagged me in a chain of a couple women I didn't know asking each other, I don't even know where to start. Do I want to run for office? I don't know. What do you do in office? What are the offices that exist that one can run for? I mean, really baseline questions. And they were kind of on fire but didn't know where to put it. So she tagged me on Facebook, and what it turned into was a conversation with these 2 women. Again, I'd never met them. We created an Eventbrite for a meeting at the public library where people could come and just learn like government 101 and figure out if they were interested in this. And then the plan was, if people were, we'd plug them into a candidate training. So we had this idea to do this. The event sold out, and we held over the course of 4 months, 3 of these events at the public library, because they'd sold out, and we wanted to get to every single person who was interested. And I did this with 2 women I did not meet until the day we all showed up at the library. And I had my little like nerdy government PowerPoint that I'd done on my computer. And that's just one story that not nearly everyone in that room then turned around and ran for office, but they were really excited to learn about ways to engage. And I do think it helped people. And I think there are things like that happening all over the community.
Speaking of engaging, we're going to ask folks, we've got about 5 minutes, and then we're going to throw it over to that corner there by the camera and where Andy's holding up his hands. So if you have some questions for the senator or for Councilmember Brown, please make your way over there, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Speaking of which, we've had a few days to kind of, well, digest those chants that you were talking about, the tweets that came from this president that kind of started this whole thing. How do you view it, Senator? Where are we in this whole debate over race, racism, and presidential behavior?
Well, I was not surprising to many of you, I was not a big fan of George W. Bush, but I didn't think he told the truth about the Iraq War, and I didn't like what he wanted to do with Medicare and Social Security, a number of other things. But you all can remember back in 2011, within a few days, maybe a week of the terrorist attacks, George Bush went to a mosque, and he said it wasn't Muslims who attacked our country, it was terrorists who attacked our country. And imagine President Trump would do anything like that. He, of course, wouldn't, and it's troubling. And I talked to my colleagues. I can't say too much about what I'm going to say. I had a conversation. Mitt Romney came into my office the other day, and just to talk to him and to those Republicans that really do think about this. And again, I can't describe what he said because it was a private meeting, but there is a whole lot of anguish among a lot of Republican members of Congress, and some, like Romney, have spoken out more than others, but it's troubling. I think this presidential election is going to be Donald Trump playing to race and immigration and fear. This whole election will be about that. That was just sort of the beginning last night, or the other night, and it's troubling. I think that this country's better than that, and I am way more optimistic for this country and for this state than to believe that will work. But I think that's what he sees as his path to re-election.
Were the tweets racist?
Oh yeah, he's a racist. I mean, he to cite his, I don't want applause for that. Start with the conservative Nixon Justice Department finding his family, he and his dad discriminated on housing, to the Central Park Five he digs in on. Said, well, they confessed. Yeah, they confessed because of what happened with the police and all. Then the Obama campaign, then Charlottesville. Then people that have worked with him have said he engages in racist talk a lot of the time. I can't prove that. The other I see with eyes wide open. And that a president would try to build his name and image and future around dividing people. That's bad enough. I mean, because so much of his presidency has been divisions. He mocks his opponents. He criticizes the people he hired. Jay Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, is a guy I know pretty well from a banking committee, and Trump appointed him, and he's always attacking Jay Powell. I mean, it's just, that's not the most important, most significant thing, but just this all upheaval, chaos, injecting this anger and division and race and religion into our public discourse is just really troubling.
Let's continue the discourse in another way. As promised, this is tradition here with the CMC, and that is to open it up to questions from you in the audience. So we have a line over there. If you would, state your name. We do ask you not to editorialize. If you can get to the question pretty quickly, state your name and what you'd like to ask, please.
Thank you. My name is Renee Delane of Women Who Dare, and I would ask each of you to answer this question. What person of color, living or not, of either gender or any orientation, would you say is the person you feel most proud to support or to have supported their views?
In politics?
No, it doesn't have to be politics, anything, any experience at all in life.
Well, the person of color who has made the most impact on my life is Toni Morrison, who is a Lorraine native. I've had the honor of seeing her speak twice, and but beyond that, I've been reading her since I was a little girl. And beloved Song of Solomon were the two that made the biggest impression on me. I wrote my senior thesis on Song of Solomon, and so there is a kinship you feel with a writer who wouldn't know who you are when you enter a room. And I do feel that with Toni Morrison. I feel that I know her, and I feel that she has blessed me with her wisdom and her beauty.
And I bought the whole Toni Morrison set of books, and then Emily took them all. So I'm glad you brought that up. So maybe I will eventually get some of them back. I would say John Lewis. Not surprising maybe that I would give an answer of an elected official. And John, Emily and Elizabeth got to go to Selma with John. I've gone 4 times. I think they've gone once with me. I led pilgrimages there with other members of Congress. And nobody was as courageous as John. Nobody's as kind as John. Few people had the impact. He wasn't well known at the time. He was the youngest person to speak at the Dr. King speech at the Lincoln Memorial, the I Have a Dream speech. John was the youngest one, and they had to pull him back to keep his rhetoric from being too hot. And he just never ever forgets. And he once, I won't tell the whole story for time reasons, but he used to say, "Make trouble, make good necessary trouble," and that's how he's lived his incredible life.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I own Regionomics, and even though I'm an economist, I'm very fundamentally optimistic about the country and our city and our state. And I see the conversation changing from that for the first time in my life. And I'm just wondering how folks like me, just common ordinary people, can kind of change the conversation back to a place of optimism and that we can do better and we can grow.
You want to go first?
No. I will if you want. Okay. Sort of one at a time. That's a pretty cliche-ish answer, and a fairly shallow one. But this has become. People like to say it's become a tribal society. That you're, and one of the questions this will directly answer. But this is something I can say. When I was talking to Senator Romney yesterday, he came over to my office and we spent about probably 30 minutes. And I asked him, I said, what's the difference? You may know that the evangelical community is overwhelmingly very supportive of the president, according to polls. The Mormon community, not nearly as much. I mean, the Mormons are more likely Republicans, but they have problems with Trump because of character, is the way Romney would say it. But he said the difference is the Mormon church has more, they have one leader, the president elect, I believe elected by the elders. I'm not sure how the structure of the church works. And they have a respect for authority. The evangelicals are a little more atomized and less like that. And he thinks it's a lot of it is about that. And I think it's also because people like Romney have spoken out about the president's character. But just talking to him and talking to others, I really think it's sort of changing people's minds one at a time, not get caught up in all the cacophony of politics these days and the divisions. And I would just say this: this is not the worst time in our nation's history. I would say, and I don't want you to applaud this. Probably most of you agree with it, but I think this is the worst president in my lifetime. But I don't think this is the worst time for our country. Maybe in American history. I don't know a lot about James Buchanan, but this is the worst. This is not the worst time in our history. The McCarthy era was worse. The Depression was worse. The Civil War, to be sure, was worse. So we will get through this. The question is how, and how do we heal as a nation and as a society after this divisiveness.
The only thing I would add is if you have children in your life, teach them to be kind and teach them the difference. Teach them that difference is a beautiful thing and a wonderful part of our country. Actually, Shannon Ginther I was at a meeting with her last week, and the mayor's mother recently passed, and she read us a reading, and I'm not doing a good job of regurgitating it because I don't remember who wrote it, but it was a reading that they were going to read at Andy's mother's funeral, all about teaching that difference is to be celebrated. And so if you have children in your life, teach them those things and teach them to be kind.
And I'm just so much more optimistic about this. I mean, I mentioned the direction politically of the state and the toxicity of politics, but I'm so optimistic of young people because of the way young people look at diversity is so much different from my generation, and that's so inspiring. That just in and of itself, Trip, as you know.
Next question.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathy Fox. I wanted to follow up on what Liz was talking about women deciding to start running after 2016. In my lifetime, I've seen women make a couple steps forward and then at least one step back in terms of the numbers of women in political office. Do you think it will make a difference if we get to the point where women are 50% of the office holders?
I do. I think it will make a difference. But we also have to think about representative democracy in the sense of people of color. How many African Americans, how many Latinos, how many immigrants. I mean, when I look at Ilhan Omar and the fact that she is a naturalized citizen and believes so much in America and what we stand for that she decided to run for office, there's nothing more American than that. I mean, that's one reason I'm so appalled by the send her back chance is she immigrated here, she naturalized, and she ran for office. That's incredible. I had the cleansing experience this week of giving remarks at a naturalization ceremony yesterday morning in Judge Marbley's courtroom. And I looked out over 52 petitioners, brand new US citizens from 30 countries. And I was so grateful that they're here in our city because they are really making the Columbus of the future alongside all of us here. And so when we think about representative democracy, part of it is, yes, women should be 50%, more, but but it isn't, that simple. We really need to think about representation really broadly, and I think that if we were promised a representative democracy by our framers and founders, we have yet to actualize that. When we do, we will all do better.
Nevada's the first state. Nevada has 50%. Has a majority of women in their legislature, and they have 2 female U.S. senators. One of them I just love, Catherine Cortez Masto. The other, Senator Rosen, I don't know as well yet. She's new. But I just had a conversation with Catherine about what a majority, because I said to her, you have majority of women now, because I think they had a special election and pushed it to over 50%. And she just started talking about how this state is getting better, her state, because she can see things already out of that legislature. So it's, and about naturalization ceremonies, how many of you have ever been to a naturalization ceremony? Third half, yeah. Go to one. They are the most inspiring, uplifting. It's an hour. It's free. It's at the federal courthouse, at least every couple of weeks, if not more, right? Yeah, something like that. And they are just wonderful because you see people often in their native dress. They want to come to this. They want to be citizens. They are more informed, frankly, than many of us in this country who are citizens. And it's just when you're depressed or down about our society, our country, our future, go to that, and it will change you.
Next question.
My name is Tom Tucker, originally from Mansfield, Ohio.
I was his paper boy.
When
I was his paper boy, Coleman Road.
I'm here with 3 of my 4 children. We recognized Sherrod had a lot of possibilities when he was delivering our paper. And in fact, my wife, Kate, gave the first coffee for him on his way up the ladder.
Wow, it's true.
You've encouraged our family to be active in politics, and we followed you all your career, and we're sure Elizabeth will be just as well, and perhaps go further than you do. Thank you.
Think how nice it would have been if I got the paper there earlier in the morning and delivered the plain dealer, because I wasn't the greatest paper boy ever.
I don't know if the crowd heard during the applause, too. You said the name of the street.
Coleman Road, it was right down, I know 679, was that the number? Something like, what was the number? No, 679 was further down. Never mind, 5, so that doesn't matter. Anyway, Coleman Road, Mansfield.
Yeah, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning, but okay. The next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Hua Wang, and I'm a professor at The Ohio State University in food science, microbiology, and interdisciplinary nutrition. And I want to take this opportunity to share a story about Senator Brown. Probably Elizabeth or Emily probably don't even know. Only a few of us from The Ohio State probably have heard about that. I study antibiotic resistance, which is a hot topic everybody know about. And many years ago, about more than a decade ago, we've discovered that actually the problem is not necessarily deal with raw meat and chicken that everybody heard about, but it's actually due to cheese and yogurt. Everybody eat it, we all enjoy it, and including fresh produce. So when I had this discovery, it was a shocking news. I was so worried because my colleagues said, you're going to wipe out the whole industry, right? I was worried about losing my job. At that point, think about what Senator Brown just said, public service and principle, right? And doing things effectively. So what we have done is, in fact, we have published the data, and I work with my colleague, and through our Ohio State University office in Washington, D.C., contacted Cheryl's office. And shortly, I got a message from him asking me to help him work on his draft bill on the topic, sending to working with the senators. So I was so shocked I provided my input. Shortly, I noticed it turned into reality. And I can tell you another side of the story. You don't see cheese and yogurt on the table or vegetables as salad today, right? I work with the program office until I explain that, but no, I'm just kidding. I just become a member this week, but I really enjoy it. Anyway, the good news is we worked with our industry from Ohio, which is the Swiss Cheese Consortium, that allow us to go to their company and a manufacturing plant and figure out step by step where the problem came from. In fact, it only took us 4 years to solve this major problem impacting everybody's dinner table, our dinner plate, yogurt and cheese, that now you can eat these food without any problems. So I wanted to say that my colleagues nationwide, whether it's from Dallas or from Iowa, when I shared the story about my interaction with Senator Brown, they said, you are so lucky you have a great senator who are so receptive to science and really help solve the biggest problem impacting the world. So I wanted to share that story. And I want to add a little bit more. There's another half of the story. Okay.
Yeah, let's get to one more question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Later on.
Thanks.
Hello, my name's Bill Murawski. I have a question on health care. What are your opinions on the current lower court case where they're going to be ruling on the constitutionality of the ACA? And should they be successful, what do you believe would be the contingencies in a situation like that? Again, this is the case that's based
Texas,
on...
right?
Yeah.
The president couldn't repeal the Affordable Care Act through the legislative process, through the Democratic small d process, because of Susan Collins and John McCain Lisa Murkowski voting no. There was no plan. They said repeal and replace. There was no plan to anything to replace it with. So that didn't work. So the president, it's so important to him in part because it's called Obamacare by some, my view, that he went through the courts to do it. And I'm concerned because if the courts strike it down, we lose the expansion in this state that John Kasich did. 25-year-olds aren't in their parents' plans any longer. The prescription drug benefit's gone for seniors. A big part of it, the preventive care for seniors is wiped away. I don't know how Congress would fix it with the divisions, how we would put any of the toothpaste back in the tube. I don't think that McConnell would. I think it'll be chaotic, and I think that's probably what the president wants there. And a lot of people will be hurt. Yeah, I think the court will not decide that in the end. The district court, where suits like that are often filed in the Eastern District of Texas, that's not a surprise he did it, but I think as it works its way up, I can't imagine they would want to create that much chaos in the healthcare system. It will hurt the hospitals in this city for sure. It will close hospitals in rural Ohio.
Thank you for all of your questions. Are you sure you don't want to run for president?
Sure. Liz, talking to you.
Yeah.
Someday.
Yeah. No offense, but I meant that question for Liz.
She's 35 now.
Carol, back to you.
Thank you. I hope you all found today's forum a reason for optimism in the future. Let's thank our sponsors, the Jeffrey Company and AT&T and Planned Parenthood of Central Ohio. And of course, our speakers, Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Brown, and Scott Light. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you next week.